Hey everybody, my name is Marcel. This is IrnieracingNews. Today is May 19th, 2023. Today's story, or this morning, is the UK and Norway have partnered to counter undersea threats in the North Atlantic. How funny when you think about the Nordstrem Pipelines. They say that the Nordstrem pipeline explosion highlighted the need for this. I mean, have they looked into the reports that Norway was one of the ringleaders in the explosion? Maybe they should take a look at Seymour Hersh's story and explains the details of the operation, because the Norwegians, it was the base of operation, and they had interests of their own to sell their own natural gas at higher prices by destroying the pipeline. And they were totally in cahoots with their own divers, working with the U.S. Navy divers to plant the explosives. Maybe I should read a little bit of the report operation for you guys right now. But first, I'm going to read you the report about this new cooperation on May 18th. Britain and Norway have agreed to increase cooperation on undersea capabilities, including countering threats to undersea infrastructures, the British government said in a statement on Thursday. The attack on the Nord Stream pipeline has determined even closer collaboration across our collective assets to detect and defend against subsea threats and ensure continued North Atlantic security, British Defence Minister Ben Wallace said in a statement. So in terms of Seymour Hersh's entire article and details about the Nord Stream pipeline, the planning, the execution, the fallout, the aftermath, if you haven't seen that, I've actually read it in entirety and posted it on YouTube. So if you just look up Nord Stream Pipeline with Irnie Racing, you should find it in the search or look under my channel. So the operation, Norway was the perfect place to base the mission. In the past few years of East-West crisis, the U.S. military has vastly expanded its presence inside Norway, whose western border runs 1,400 miles along the North Atlantic Ocean and merges above the Arctic Circle with Russia. The Pentagon has created high-paying jobs and contracts amid some local controversy by investing hundreds of millions of dollars to upgrade and expand American Navy and Air Force facilities in Norway. The new works included, most importantly, an advanced synthetic aperture radar far up north that was capable of penetrating deep into Russia and came online just as the American intelligence community lost access to a series of long-range listening sites inside China. A newly refurbished American submarine base, which had been under construction for years, had become operational, and more American submarines were now able to work closely with their Norwegian colleagues to monitor and spy on a major Russian nuclear redoubt 250 miles to the east on the Kola Peninsula. America also has vastly expanded a Norwegian air base in the north and delivered to the Norwegian Air Force a fleet of Boeing-built P-8 Poseidon patrol planes to bolster its long-range spying on all things Russia. A lot of spying on Russia, huh, guys? A lot of money been spent in the last decades on this. All time, the U.S. just massive amounts of bases around the world, thousands. In return, the Norwegian government angered liberals and some moderates in its parliament last November by passing the Supplementary Defense Cooperation Agreement. Under the new deal, the U.S. legal system would have jurisdiction in certain agreed areas in the north over American soldiers accused of crimes off base, as well as over those Norwegian citizens accused or suspected of interfering with the work at the base. So we got some U.S. power and control. Norway was one of the original signatories of the NATO treaty in 1949 in the early days of the Cold War. Today, the Secretary General of NATO is Jens Stoltenberg, a committed anti-communist who served as Norway's Prime Minister for 8 years before moving to its high NATO post, with American backing in 2014, the time of the coup in Ukraine. He was a hardliner on all things Putin and Russia, who had cooperated with the American intelligence community since the Vietnam War. He has been trusted completely since. He is the glove that fits the American hand, the source said. Now, back in Washington, planners knew that they had to go to Norway. They hated the Russians, and the Norwegian Navy was full of superb sailors and divers who had generations of experience in highly profitable deep-sea oil and gas exploration, the source said. They also could be trusted to keep the mission secret. The Norwegians may have had other interests as well. The destruction of Nord Stream, if the Americans could pull it off, would allow Norway to sell vastly more of its own natural gas to Europe. Sometime in March, a few members of the team flew to Norway to meet with the Norwegian Secret Service and Navy. One of the key questions was where exactly in the Baltic Sea was the best place to plant the explosives. Nord Stream 1 and 2, each with 2 sets of pipelines, were separated much of the way by little more than a mile as they made their run to the port of Greifswald in the far northeast of Germany. The Norwegian Navy was quick to find the right spot in the shallow waters of the Baltic Sea, a few miles off Denmark Bornholm Island. The pipelines ran more than a mile apart along a seafloor that was only 260 feet deep. That would be well within the range of the divers, who, operating from a Norwegian Alta-class mine hunter, would dive with a mixture of oxygen, nitrogen, and helium streaming from their tanks and plant shaped C4 charges on the 4 pipelines with concrete protective covers. It would be tedious, time-consuming, and dangerous work, but the waters off Bornholm had another advantage. There were no major tidal currents, which would have made the task of diving much more difficult. After a bit of research, the Americans were all in. At this point, the Navy's obscure deep diving group in Panama City once again came into play. The deep-sea schools at Panama, whose trainees participated in Ivy Bells, are seen as an unwanted backwater by the elite graduates of the Navy Academy in Annapolis, who typically seek the glory of being assigned as a SEAL, fighter pilot, or submariner. If one must become a black shoe, that is, a member of the less desirable surface ship command, there is always at least duty on a destroyer, cruiser, or amphibious ship. The least glamorous of all is mine warfare. Its divers never appear in Hollywood movies or on the cover of popular magazines. The best divers with deep diving qualifications are a tight community, and only the very best are recruited for the operation and told to be prepared to be summoned to the CIA in Washington, the source said. The Norwegians and Americans had a location and the operatives, but there was another concern. Any unusual underwater activity in the waters off Bornholm might draw the attention of the Swedish and Danish navies, which could report it. Denmark had also been one of the original NATO signatories and was known in the intelligence community for its special ties to the United Kingdom. Sweden had applied for membership into NATO and had demonstrated its great skill in managing its underwater sound and magnetic sensor systems that successfully tracked Russian submarines that would occasionally show up in the remote waters of the Swedish archipelago and be forced to the surface. The Norwegians joined the Americans in insisting that some senior officials in Denmark and Sweden had to be briefed in general terms about possible diving activity in the area. In that way, someone higher up could intervene and keep a report out of the chain of command, and thus insulating the pipeline operation. What they were told and what they knew was purposely different, the source said. The Norwegian embassy, asked to comment on this story, did not respond. The Norwegians were key to solving other hurdles. The Russian Navy was known to possess surveillance technology capable of spotting and triggering underwater mines. The American explosive devices needed to be camouflaged in the way that would make them appear to be Russian system as part of a natural background. Something that required adapting to the specific salinity of the water. The Norwegians had a fix. The Norwegians also had a solution to the crucial question of when the operation should take place. Now, every June for the past 21 years, the American Sixth Fleet, whose flagship is based in Gaeta, Italy, south of Rome, had sponsored a major NATO exercise in the Baltic Sea involving scores of Allied ships throughout the region. The current exercise, held in June, would be known as the Baltic Operations 22, or BALTOPS 22. The Norwegians proposed this would be the ideal cover to plant the mines. The Americans provided one vital element. They convinced the Sixth Fleet planners to add a research and development exercise to the program. The exercise was made public by the Navy, involved in the Sixth Fleet in collaboration with the Navy's Research and Warfare Centers. The at-sea event would be held off the coast of Borom Island and involve NATO team divers planting mines, with competing teams using the latest underwater technology to find and destroy them. It was both a useful exercise and ingenious cover. The Panama City boys would do their thing, and the C4 explosives would be in place by the end of the BALTOPS 22, with a 48-hour timer attached. All of the Americans and Norwegians would be long gone by the first explosion. The days were counting down, the clock was ticking, and we were nearing mission accomplishment, the source said. And then Washington had second thoughts. The bombs would still be planted during BALTOPS, but the White House was worried about that a two-day window for the detonation would be too close to the end of the exercise, and it would be obvious that America had been involved. Instead, the White House had a new request. Can you guys in the field come up with some way to blow the pipelines later on command? Some members of the planning team were angered and frustrated by the president's seemingly indecision. The Panama City divers had repeatedly practiced planting the C4 on pipelines as they would during BALTOPS, but now the team in Norway had to come up with a way to give Biden what he wanted, the ability to issue a successful execution order at the time of his choosing. Being tasked with an arbitrary last-minute change was something the CIA was accustomed to managing, but it also renewed the concerns some shared over the necessity and legality of the entire operation. The president's secret orders also evoked the CIA's dilemma in the Vietnam War days, when President Johnson, confronted by growing anti-Vietnam War sentiment, ordered the agency to violate its charter, which specifically barred it from operating inside America, by spying on anti-war leaders to determine whether they were being controlled by communist Russia. The agency ultimately acquiesced, and throughout the 1970s it became clear just how far it had been willing to go. There were subsequent newspaper revelations in the aftermath of the Watergate scandals about the agency spying on American citizens, its involvement in the assassination of foreign leaders, and its undermining of the socialist government of Salvador Allende. Those revelations led to a dramatic series of hearings in the mid-1970s in the Senate, led by Frank Church of Idaho, that made it clear that Richard Helms, the agency director at the time, accepted that he had an obligation to do what the president wanted, even if it meant violating the law. In unpublished closed-door testimony, Helms ruefully explained that you almost have an immaculate conception when you do something under secret orders from a president. Whether it's right that you should have it or wrong that you shall have it, the CIA works under different rules and ground rules than any other part of the government. He was essentially telling the senators that he, as head of the CIA, understood that he had been working for the crown and not the Constitution. Bam! The Americans at work in Norway operated under the same dynamic, and dutifully began working on the new problem, how to remotely detonate the C4 explosives on Biden's order. It was a much more demanding assignment than those in Washington understood. There was no way for the team in Norway to know when the president might push the button. Would it be in a few weeks, many months, or half a year or longer? The C4 attached to the pipeline would be triggered by a sonar buoy dropped by a plane on the short notice, but the procedure involved the most advanced signal processing technology. Once in place, the delayed timing devices attached to any of the 4 pipelines could be accidentally triggered by the complex mix of ocean background noises throughout the heavily trafficked Baltic Sea, from near and distant ships, underwater drilling, seismic events, waves, and even sea creatures. To avoid this, the sonar buoy, once in place, would emit a sequence of unique low-frequency tonal sounds, much like those emitted by a flute or a piano, that would be recognized by the timing device, and after preset hours of delay, triggering the explosives. You want a signal that is robust enough so that no other signal could accidentally send a pulse that detonated the explosives. I was told by Dr. Theodore Postel, Professor Emeritus of Science, Technology, and National Security Policy at MIT. Postel, who has served as the science advisor to the Pentagon's Chief of Naval Operations, said the issue facing the group in Norway because of Biden's delay was one of chance. The longer the explosives are in the water, the greater risk there would be a random signal that would launch the bombs. On September 26, 2022, our Norwegian Navy P-8 surveillance plane made a seemingly routine flight and dropped a sonar buoy. The signal spread underwater, initially to Nord Stream 2 and then to Nord Stream 1. A few hours later, the high-powered C4 explosives were triggered, and 3 of the 4 pipelines were put out of commission within a few minutes. Pools of methane gas that remained in the shuttered pipelines could be seen spreading on the water surface, and the world learned that something irreversible had taken place. So there is a quick read of just one section, guys. Whatever it was, the planning or the execution, was it called? I don't remember now. But absolute terrorist act, guys. Biden is a world terrorist. It was called the operation section. And an environmental terrorist as well. Not only, and yet at the same time, there's such fucking hypocrites that they go on and make this agenda about saving the environment. We need all to move to electric cars and make sure we get more cobalt out of the mines with the African children, the blood cobalt, the blood batteries, and on and on and on. The world is so messed up, guys. So freaking messed up. And this is just 1.1% of the mess. Irnieracing News.